Wait, before you scroll past this, I need 30 seconds of your attention. Not because this is shocking, because it's been erased. Half the humans who have ever lived have menstruated. That's not a niche detail. That's not a footnote. That's basic biology repeated across every generation, on every continent, since before anyone was writing anything down. And yet open almost any history book and you'll find 3 chapters on siege warfare and 0 paragraphs on what women actually did every single month while building, farming, ruling, and surviving those civilizations. So today we're going digging. Egypt, Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, Asia, the Americas. We're going to find out what women used, what men wrote about it, and one story near the end involving a black woman inventor that most people have never heard and honestly should have. Let's start with a question nobody asked for 10,000 years, which is, what did you actually put down there before plastic existed? Ancient Egypt is the earliest place we have real paperwork on this. The Kahin Gynecological Papyrus, dated to roughly 1800 BCE, is one of the oldest medical documents on Earth, and it's almost entirely dedicated to women's reproductive health. Egyptian physicians weren't guessing. They were cataloging. The material of choice was almost certainly softened linen strips, rolled and reused, since linen production was already a massive Egyptian industry used for everything from clothing to burial wrappings. Here's the twist, though. Egyptian religious life connected menstrual blood to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess associated with both plague and healing, which meant the blood itself was treated less like contamination and more like raw power. Egyptian medical texts even prescribed menstrual blood as an ingredient in certain remedies. Try explaining that one at a modern pharmacy counter. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the Greeks took that idea and ran it completely off a cliff. You've probably heard that ancient doctors thought weird things about women's bodies. You have not heard this one. Hippocratic physicians, the same tradition that gave us the doctor's oath, genuinely believed the uterus could physically detach and wander around a woman's body, causing disease, a condition they called hysteria from the Greek word for womb. Menstruation was seen as the mechanism that kept this wandering organ in check. Missed too many periods, ancient Greek logic went, and your uterus might migrate toward your throat. This wasn't some fringe folk belief. It was taught, written down, and repeated for centuries by serious physicians. And versions of hysteria as a real medical diagnosis lingered in Western medicine well into the 1800s. Not every Greek doctor bought it, though. Soranus of Ephesus, writing in the 2nd century CE, produced a genuinely careful gynecological text and dismissed a lot of the wandering womb nonsense outright. Practically speaking, Greek women used wool, plugged, or padded, since Greece's economy ran heavily on sheep farming and wool was everywhere. Cheap, absorbent, disposable enough to burn. Rome inherited Greek medicine and then, somehow, made it weirder. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, in his sprawling Encyclopedia Natural History, claimed a menstruating woman could dull the edge of a blade, cause seeds to wither, and drive dogs into a rabies-like frenzy just by walking past them. The agricultural writer Columella took a gentler angle, seriously advising in his farming manual that a menstruating woman walking around the edge of a garden could actually kill caterpillars and other pests before they destroyed the crop. Read that again. Rome didn't just fear menstrual blood. Some Romans thought it doubled as pest control, while others thought it was basically a biological weapon. Actual Roman women, meanwhile, were not out there patrolling vineyards or dulling swords. They used wool clouts, folded and held with a belt, and for those who could afford it, softer linen. Wealth determined comfort here the same way it determines everything else in Rome, which honestly tracked for a civilization that also had different bathhouse hours depending on your social class. Here's the pattern worth pausing on, because it repeats everywhere we go next. Across dozens of unrelated cultures, menstruation triggered isolation rules, and those rules had almost nothing to do with the blood itself and everything to do with power. In parts of traditional Japanese Shinto practice, menstrual blood fell under the concept of kegar, ritual impurity, which for centuries barred women from certain shrine areas entirely, a restriction some sites still technically maintain today. In numerous West African traditions, including practices recorded among the Yoruba, menstruating women were historically restricted from certain shrines and food preparation during specific rites. In parts of Nepal, a practice called chapati exiled menstruating women and girls to outdoor huts, a custom so dangerous due to exposure and animal attacks that Nepal's government eventually criminalized it in 2017, which tells you these aren't purely ancient problems with tidy endings. And across many indigenous communities in North America, menstruating women observe periods of separation often called moon time, though the meaning behind it varied enormously by nation and was frequently framed not as punishment, but as a period of concentrated spiritual strength. Same biological event, wildly different cultural verdict depending entirely on who was writing the rules. Medieval Europe gets mocked for being filthy, and sure, some of that reputation is earned. But here's the detail that surprises people. Medieval medicine actively encouraged menstruation rather than fearing it. Physicians, following Galenic theory, believed periods purged excess or corrupted blood, so a missed period period was treated as a medical emergency, not a relief. One of the most important medical texts of the era, known as the Trotula, compiled in Salerno, Italy around the 11th and 12th centuries, and traditionally associated with a woman physician named Trotta, gave detailed instructions on menstrual regulation using herbs like mugwort and rue. This wasn't folk superstition scribbled in a margin. It was formal medical instruction written by and largely for women at a time when women were rarely credited with authorship of anything. Practically, most European women used rags or wool bound with a belt, washed and reused, while poorer laboring women likely relied heavily on thick layered clothing to manage flow, while working fields that did not pause for any one cycle. Nobody was calling in sick to the harvest. Across Asia, the story shifts again, and it's worth slowing down here because two entirely separate medical traditions independently landed in the same place. Traditional Chinese medicine, going back over 2,000 years to texts like the Huangdi Neijing, treated menstrual blood as a direct readout of internal health, tracked through concepts like qi and blood stagnation, with entire diagnostic systems built around cycle timing, color, and flow. Cotton and silk pads were common, depending on wealth, secured with fitted undergarments, and physicians prescribed specific herbal formulas depending on what the cycle was telling them. Meanwhile, in South Asia, Ayurvedic medical texts like the Sushruta Samhita, compiled roughly 2,000 years ago, described menstrual cycles in detailed physiological terms alongside herbal treatment for cramping, using ingredients like ginger and turmeric still found in Ayurvedic practice today. Two civilizations, no meaningful contact between their medical schools, both concluding the same basic things centuries apart. This is diagnostic data, not divine punishment. Compare that to the wandering womb theory a few minutes ago, and ask yourself which one actually sounds more scientific. Now for the part almost nobody teaches you, and it's the story that made me want to make this video in the first place. In the 1920s, an American inventor named Mary Beatrice Davidson Kenner designed an adjustable sanitary belt with a built-in moisture-proof pocket, decades ahead of what was commercially available. She couldn't afford a patent at the time. When a company finally expressed interest years later, representatives reportedly withdrew their offer the moment they discovered she was black. Kenner didn't get her patent until 1957, over 30 years after she designed the thing, and she still received zero credit or profit from the sanitary products that eventually flooded the market using similar mechanisms. She went on to hold 5 patents total across her lifetime, more than almost any other black American woman in history, and most people have simply never heard her name. So think about the whole map we just walked. Egyptian linen tied to a goddess of plague and healing. Greek doctors convinced your organs could wander off. Roman writers who thought you doubled as pesticide or a weapon, depending who you asked. Isolation huts on 4 different continents for 4 completely different reasons. One of them still dangerous enough to require a law in 2017. Medieval women writing gynecology textbooks in Latin. Chinese and Indian physicians independently building diagnostic systems around the same cycle. And a black inventor in the 20th century who built the modern pad's ancestor and got robbed of the credit for it. That's not a niche footnote in history. That's most of history happening to most of the population, written out of the record by the people who weren't living it. So next time somebody acts like this topic is awkward or beneath discussion, remind them Egyptian priestesses dealt with this. Roman farmers had theories about it. Medieval physicians wrote textbooks on it. And a woman named Mary Kenner solved it better than anyone before her and barely got a footnote for it. Half the human population, every generation, on every continent. That's not a weird video. That's just history nobody bothered to write down.